Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Sim Pilot, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the updates in the MCDU in the Flybywire mod for the A320neo in Microsoft Flight Simulator. There have been lots of changes since my last video on this mod where I talked about version 0.4, and there's going to be so many changes that I won't be able to fit it all into one video for the version 0.5, so I've decided to start using little update videos to talk about these features. I'll be using the latest development build today, so if you don't have all of these features yet, it could be that you're using the latest stable build, in which case these features should be coming to you in the next stable build, or you can try the developer version, although there are some risks with that. It's not obviously as stable as the full-on ready, as it's called, stable version. We're here on the ground at Heathrow Airport, once again, where we're going to set up the aircraft for a flight and have a look at the MCDU and some of the new features that have been added in. Right, let's get started. Okay, so here we are on the flight deck, and what I will say is, as ever, none of this is for any real-world use. I am a real-world Airbus pilot, but this is just for our use in home simulators to get us some extra context. What I'll also say with the Fly-by-Wire mod is that any things that I miss, I do apologise. There's loads of features, so I usually don't get round to them all, so I just pick up on a few that I've noticed. Also, I understand that, of course, there's going to be lots of changes as ever to this mod, so when you see the video things could have changed already, as well as the fact that if something's missing, I'm not criticising, it's just something that I've noticed because I know the team are doing a great job and working very hard to keep this up to date and keep the features coming. So here we are looking at the MCDU. All I've done is power up the airplane, get some of the switches in the right place. I've already got a flight plan loaded in here from Microsoft Flight Simulator's inbuilt flight planning tool, and you'll get presented with this screen now, which is the screen that appears in the real aircraft, the MCDU menu screen. This is because the MCDU is actually just this box here, so it is used to interact with the flight management guidance computer, as well as other things, ATSU, AIDS, CFDS, so it's just a tool to get through to those systems. It's not to be confused with the actual computer itself, which is the FMGC, which is hidden away elsewhere. We just use this to interact with it. But that FMGC system interacts with all of these screens. It's an incredibly powerful system. So you're going to choose your system, and it says select desired system. And typically you'll go into FMGC, and then you can start your setup. I'm going to clear out that GPS primary loss message. That's a typical message until the ATIS are aligned. So this screen, as usual, is going to show you your active database and so on. I have a video on setting up the MCDU from cold and dark. It's one of my older videos where I go through a full setup using the diffstrip acronym. So loading up data aircraft status, Init A, flight plan, secondary flight plan, which still doesn't work, radio navigation, Init B, this page here, and performance. So we're just going to talk about a few of the things that have changed so far. Before we go into any of the actual setup of the MCDU, let's go back into the MCDU menu and choose a different system. What we're going to look at today, or to start off with, sorry, is the ATSU. ATSU is the Air Traffic Service Unit. Not particularly useful phrase to know, but that's what it's talking about. So it's typically ways of interacting with air traffic control and information such as weather or getting your clearances from air traffic control. So air traffic service unit. Now the ATC menu doesn't work at the moment, or data link. That would be ways to communicate using this little window here. That's not active at the moment. That's how we can communicate with air traffic control without using the radio. But what they have added is the AOC menu. This grayed out options here is quite a nice feature now. The real aircraft doesn't have any grayed out menu options, obviously. It just works or it doesn't, but that's a great way of showing us what is not yet implemented. So AOC menu, which is airline operational control. I mean, these are acronyms that I've never even thought about. I'm having to look them up, so I can't pretend I know these off the top of my head. You just get used to using these systems, and in here we get a whole load of new options that have been added in. Now, Init would be used to initialize. You could load in a whole route from your company's ACARS system. Free text is a feature that allows you to type out a message and send it to your company or other aircraft in this case, but I won't be using that today. And I'm not sure it's implemented fully yet, the free text option. They do warn about that. Here's what's interesting. If we go to WX request, weather request, we can now start asking for METARs. So I've loaded a flight from Heathrow to Vienna. I can now press on METAR or TAF to change it between them. and I can select the airports. So it's already got my decided airports, but I could put in, for example, an alternate, Munich, and then I can send that. And all you do is type it in, as well as your route one's already loaded in. Green means the computer has decided it for you, so it already knew you wanted that, and it's will now send off. Then eventually, if you wait a minute, you'll see up here appear the line company message. Company message, there it is. And what that means is you've received a message. It always says company message wherever it's from. It doesn't actually mean it's from the company. So now, if we go return to AOC menu, we were in the weather request. Now if I go to received messages, here's METAR. Select there, and we've got Heathrow, 508, 5 and 5, 993, and we've got Vienna. I don't think it's... Oh, and I can scroll down to Munich. That's interesting. Mostly on the real aircraft, you can't scroll through quite as easily as that, but there's loads of different versions of this system, so that could just be the ones I've seen. But there you go. So there's some snow in Vienna and light freezing rain. Wow, that's not great. That would be pretty nasty conditions. Freezing rain's very bad for flying. And there's Munich. So that is a way to get some weather. And we did METAR. If we changed it to TAF, we would get the forecast. So METAR is the actual weather at the moment. TAF is the forecast weather. They do a new METAR every 30 minutes, and then the TAF will be updated sometimes every 12 hours. It depends, and they cover a period, sometimes up to a day, 24 hours from when they're issued. So where is this getting its information from? Well, if we press return at the bottom left and go to, in fact, I think we're going to need to do MCDU menu, and instead of going into ATSU, go to options down here. And now we can see the ATIS SRC, METAR SRC, SIGMET, which isn't active at the moment, and TAF SRC. So these are just deciding where you get that information from. This is not a feature on the real aircraft. The information just comes from the normal source that your airline uses. So ATIS, I've selected VATSIM. So I have to be connected to VATSIM for it to work. FAA only works in the US, Pilot Edge or IVAO. So it depends which one you're using. So I have VATSIM in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So I have that selected there. If I go to METAR, as we were saying, METAR is the actual weather. That is coming from Microsoft Flight Simulator, Meteor Blue. So that's quite useful because if I have live weather enabled in the sim, it will give me that weather. Although I would say if I was going to fly around in VATSIM, I'd probably use the VATSIM one for the METAR, which is the actual weather. The ATIS is, of course, the actual weather as well. It's just issued by the airport and includes other things like runway in use and so on, whereas the METAR will just give you the weather at the time. It won't tell you runways in use or any other information. TAF as well, obviously, choose your source for that. So I've just left it at default. So the only one I changed was ATIS to VATSIM to make sure I had some sort of source for that. And there you go. So those are what those options are talking about. Free text enable, it gives you a warning because people can send you messages and so on, use at your own risk. And like I say, I don't think it's fully active at the moment, but will be soon. While we're in this options page, some other things they've changed. ATIS align time, you can now have real align time. So as you can see, it is now aligned actually, but it takes the full sort of, well, depending, somewhere in the region of 7 to 10 minutes typically, although it can be a bit longer, a bit slower. You can do faster instant. Over here, you have Accel-Alt. That's something I'll talk about later in the performance page. And the DMC self-test, 15 seconds. I wouldn't fiddle with that. 15 seconds is not going to change your day. So there we go. I think what this is talking about, DMC is the display management computer that runs these screens. So I think it's talking about the self-test when they power on. So let's go back to our MCDU, ATSU, AOC. And we've done weather request, where we chose METAR, TAF, and the airports we wanted. We've seen free text. We've seen received messages is where that information then arrives to. And you can also do ATIS. Now, this page looks just like it does in the real aircraft. You can type in your airport. So, for example, the real aircraft is quite clever. It would actually know that you're departing now, so it would automatically select departure ATIS and your departure airport. And then you can send that in exactly the same way. So you can just change the code up there to your ICAO code, send, and then hopefully get a company message up here. Now, I'm not connected to VATSIM currently, so I do not know if that's going to find anything, but I have tested it. If you are connected to VATSIM, it will work. So let's have a look. Receive messages, ATIS, no, D8 not available. Okay, we are now connected to VATSIM, so let me try that again. ATIS, EGLL, departure, send, company message, receive messages, ATIS. Okay, so it doesn't work if there's no ATIS being provided by VATSIM, so whoever's running the airport. So I've just had a look. There is a current ATIS active at Gatwick. So if I type in Gatwick, departure ATIS, send. This page is used a lot by us. We use it obviously to get our information for departure and arrival at the airports. Not all airports use this. At some airports you have to take the audio ATIS. But what we use this for as well is if you're thinking about diverting or you're concerned about weather en route or there's fog in the area, you'll use this to get loads of different ATIS. It doesn't just have to be the one you're actually planning to fly to. Company message then. Oh, let's see if that one includes any information. There it is, Gatwick ATIS, which we've taken using the VATSIM network. So yeah, brilliant. I mean, really clever. That makes life a lot easier. It's quite time consuming to have one of the pilots go away to tune in the frequency, listen to it. They can't do the radio. And of course, when we're doing single pilot stuff in Flight Simulator, it is incredibly difficult to try and listen to an ATIS whilst also flying and doing air traffic control. So that is a great feature. So I'm really happy they've added that into here. And this is really, really nice feature that I haven't even seen in X-Plane yet, although it may be possible. I just haven't seen it. I know it's possible in FS Labs, I believe, in P3D. But there we go. So we can now get the weather, we can get the ATIS, we can see our messages, and we can do free text. That's all been added in there. And soon, hopefully, some more of these features I've seen have been already being tested on the Discord. Next step then, I promised I would talk about the options menu, MCDU menu options. What's acceleration altitude? 1500 feet. So that is if I go to performance page, the acceleration altitude in here. So it should be 1500 feet above the airport you're at. So we're at an elevation of about 77 feet or 80 feet. So it's added 1500 feet to that to give us our thrust reduction and acceleration altitude. It will always be an automatic figure. A lot of airlines will have it in there, and then you may need to adjust it for noise abatement. As I think I talk a little bit about that in my takeoff tutorial. So if we change that, MCDU menu options, and I put in 1000, which is also quite a common number to have there. Then we go back to performance page. Well, maybe it needs to reload, but it should be 1000 feet above the airport you're at. So that is what that's talking about. So thrust reduction altitude, you'll bring the thrust levers back from either toga or flex back to climb. And acceleration altitude is when the aeroplane will change from trying to fly at SRS or V2. So it's sort of takeoff speed, and then it will accelerate to its en route speed. So that's now been added in. So finally then, just running through the normal flow, as I said, so data, aircraft status, this page, every page has been improved. The colors are now much more accurate than they were. I was looking back at my original MCDU setup video, and it's amazing how much improvement we've had since then. So that's our aircraft status page where we check these things. I won't do the whole tutorial now. Again, Init A page, so things like cost index can go in here, your cruising flight level, or looks just like the real aircraft now. It's fantastic. You can add in the alternate. I think that wasn't working originally. So if we said Munich is going to be our alternate, Echo Delta, oh no, not Lima, Echo Delta Delta Mike, and that all works now. IRS init, it does this automatically, which is correct. The real aircraft or the real Neos do this automatically, so you don't actually need to do this because they take it from the GPS position once they're aligned. And the wind does not yet work, sadly. Flight plan page, this is all loaded in as it was from the Microsoft Flight Simulator. Not too much has changed here, although we do have an accurate distance. I hope that counts down now. Secondary does not work yet, so I'll talk about that when it becomes available. RadNav page does work, so I could put in, for example, London VOR, and then it brings up the page to let us choose the correct one. So the top one will be the closest, 2 nautical miles away, so that's the correct VOR for us today. And it can tune that in and types it in there. And we can display it using this little needle up here. Oh, if I can get it to go right. And right, there we go, VOR London. Fantastic. I'm planning to do a video on tracking needles and so on in the near future. Same with the ADFs, obviously. Next would be Init B, which now, again, it looks much better than it used to. We've got 0 fuel 8 CG to load in. So I'll just make up some numbers for that. So how much fuel have we got on board? We've got 10.6. So that means we're probably at a 0 fuel 8 of 50.2. So if I did 50.2, 2/30. Obviously you'd have these numbers yourself depending how you load up your simulator. Block fuel I can see is 10.6, and it used to do this all wrong, but now if I put in 10.6, you'll see the rest should fill in on its own as it calculates these things. It's really good. Same with the trip wind. There you go. So it's done the landing weight, it's done a trip fuel, it's calculated all of these, which is exactly what the real aircraft does. When I did my first video on this back before we had this mod, these numbers all had to be sort of half filled out yourself. Now we've got planned alternate fuel, we've got the correct takeoff weight and landing weight, which again are in green because they're calculated by the computer. We fill in this box and it fills all of the rest in. Trip wind, if I put in let's put in minus 20 knots as a wind, your flight plan will tell you that. If you use SimBrief, puts in headwind 20 knots, things like that should adjust the time. I'm not entirely sure if this adjusts it yet though. If I let's put in a headwind of 100, I wonder if that would increase the trip fuel. 4.4, put in 0. It does. Amazing. So there you go. It's even calculating based on your flight level and the wind. So these are a huge step up, and this is what the real aircraft would do. If you forget to put the winds in, your numbers cannot match your flight plan, and that's never good. You need to find out why. Same with the alternate fuel. Although it's calculated, it's going to take me 1.4 to get from Vienna to Munich, because it is quite a long way. It's not a great alternate really. I could increase that to whatever my flight plan says. So maybe it's going to be 1.8. And then it increases the minimum fuel required. So these numbers all work now, just like the real aircraft. This page, this Init B page, which is a really important page in the real aircraft, is now looking really nice. Finally, then the last thing I want to talk about today is the performance page. We've gone through diffs RIP, so the second I is Init B, and finally performance. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, my MCDU video talks about these things. So performance, takeoff from runway 09 right, takeoff shift, that is talking about if we use an intersection for departure. So that's not featured yet, and that's rarely used. A lot of airlines don't use that feature at all. Then we've got our flap/trimmable horizontal stabilizer setting. Don't worry about the THS, you don't need to type it in here, it's just a reminder. Most airlines don't bother with that, but let's say we want to take off flap 1. You put in your flap 1 there. Flex temperature, this is not modeled yet. I hope it is eventually. It looks like it's modeled. For example, it shows up on the screen when the engines are running, but it's not actually working yet. In the real aircraft, you wouldn't have a temperature as low as 20, so I typically put in something like 55, something like that. You can flex all the way up to 69 degrees in the 320s, or 70 if you're below sea level, depends where you're flying from. But it just means that the lower that temperature, so at 50 degrees we'll use more thrust, at 69 degrees we'll use less thrust, because the airplane will assume the temperature's that outside. But like I say, it doesn't actually change the thrust you'll get. It just means that when you put the thrust levers into flex MCT, you'll get the right indications on your PFD saying flex takeoff. So it does work for a purpose, but not to get too worried about. We've talked about thrust reduction and acceleration altitudes. You can leave them as 1500, 1500 or 1000, 1000. And the speeds now. So if you're looking at this page, I've had a lot of questions about why can't I see the speeds? How do I calculate them? Well, it's great. This is not how the real aircraft works. In the real aircraft, you'll use your performance computer for these, or whatever your airline uses. It could be on an iPad, it could be through ACARS, it could be through a Windows computer. There's loads of ways of doing it. All we have to do is select it, and it brings the speed up down here, and then select it again. Now this message is accurate, although it wouldn't appear at this stage. It's a good message. V1, VR, V2 disagree. This is when the Airbus is saying your speeds don't work, don't use them. Now this message will only appear if you've entered the VR and the V2 incorrectly as well. But anyway, we'll ignore it, select VR, and then select V2. And we get our speed loaded in, and now the Airbus is happy. Now if I was to lower V2 to something below, for example, VR, so if I put in 120, that's clearly a mistake. Our V2 speed can't be below our rotate speed because we're already in the air. By rotate speed, we'll be rotating obviously. So we get that disagree message. So there you go. If you're having trouble or you can't find the speeds, that's how you do it. Something I'm really pleased about is that now if you increase the flap setting, so let's say I want to take off flap 2, although these speeds don't change immediately, if I now reselect them, they actually do change and they get lower, which is just what the real aircraft would do. With more flap out, you would expect slower speeds because the aircraft has a bit more lift. So there you go, they've all reduced slightly. And same, you can take off at flap 3 as well, and they'll be even lower. So that is really good. That is a great feature, and the performance calculations are done for you. Really simple, really easy. Really impressed with that. So yeah, the takeoff page has improved a lot as well. So there we go. That's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. Just a short video to talk about some of the changes to the MCDU setup that have been added into the current developer build, as I said, developer build of the Flybywire mod for the A320neo. There'll be more videos to come where we'll talk about the other features and more tutorials to come on the A320neo as more features are added. So do please like and subscribe if you'd like to be kept up to date with those. Otherwise, do please keep safe, and we'll see you again in another video or live stream soon. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.